welcome members and viewers who may be watching our proceedings on Oireachtas.ie and to this meeting of the Joint Oireachtas Committee on Issues Affecting Traveller Community, and I welcome always our visitors in the gallery who have come to watch proceedings in person. The purpose of today's meeting at the Joint Committee is to continue deliberations on the topic of traveller mental health, when we will meet the Minister of State, Mr Jim Daly, and officials from the Department of Health, Senator Joan Freeman, who has advised us that she has to leave because of a clash of a commitment, but her commitment to this issue is noted, and thank you for giving us a little bit of your time this morning. The mental health reform, Dr Brian Keogh from Trinity College Dublin, the Clanwilliam Institute and the HSE. And we welcome everybody here this morning, and it's our third meeting of the Joint Committee on key issues affecting travellers, and the third focusing on mental health. Last week, following the hearings on the 24th of September, where we heard powerful and stark testimonies from Martin Riley, he gave a very harrowing first-person account of suicide and the impact of it in his life and in his family. Mr Bernard Joyce of the Irish Traveller Movement reminded us of the statistics and the rates of suicide among travellers from the well-respected and authoritative 2010 All-Ireland Traveller Health Study. Suicide 7 times the rate for traveller men and 6 times for women as compared to the general population. And the Irish Traveller Movement's estimation of 30 deaths by suicide to the end of August, an estimation not made lightly. Dr Bridget Quilligan from Kerry Travellers Health Development Project spoke of the hurt and the causes of traveller mental ill health, enduring long-standing racism and hate speech, prejudice and discrimination towards her community. Miss Minnie Connors from Wexford also shared her personal experiences of everyday racism, hate speech, prejudice and discrimination in her life and its effect on the mental health of her family and her friends. Mr Patrick O'Reilly of Pavy Point, who is with us today in the gallery, spoke of the everydayness of suicide in his community and brought attention to the State's response and cuts still not reversed. So last week we heard from Mr Thomas McCann of the Traveller Counselling Service, echoing and amplifying testimonies from the 24th of September hearing. He also referenced the 2010 All-Ireland Traveller Health Study, its shocking findings being ignored. He spoke of indifference by the Irish State in the face of the facts and inaction. And Thomas spoke of the limitations of goodwill and the need for real political will and leadership. And he called for 3 specific actions: the establishment of a National Traveller Mental Health Steering Group, the development of a National Traveller Mental Health Strategy and allocation of necessary resources to ensure its implementation. Ms Sandra McDonough from Offaly Travellers Movement gave a stark account of mental health among travellers in that county, and in her words, the devastating effects on my community. She spoke of a colleague who'd lost 8 first cousins to suicide. She echoed Thomas McCann's observation of indifference and asked the Irish Government, how can you watch my people suffer and die and do nothing about it? Sandra outlined an approach in Offaly called Travelling to Wellbeing, showing positive results and one to be supported or possibly replicated. Ms Bridget Kelly from Galway Traveller Movement said that addressing the mental health needs of my community should be a priority. She drew committee members' attention to just therapy, an approach developed in New Zealand and worth looking at, and welcome Minister Daly. Niamh Keating spoke of the situation regarding mental health affecting travellers in West Limerick. She referenced a recently completed baseline study among travellers in Clare. Findings include 94% of people surveyed saying that they had experienced discrimination and 87% saying they worry about discrimination some or most of the time. That anxiety can be the context for mental ill health. Niamh also brought the committee members' attention to a peer-to-peer youth mental health strategy having a positive impact, though like all such initiatives needing to be put on a firm funding footing and adequately resourced to do its job. Ms Maria Carnier from Exchange House talked about the social determinants of good mental health, including access to safe living conditions, adequate housing, educational opportunities, meaningful engagement in work and society. She said that 90% of the people seeking support from Exchange House had experienced trauma. Maria spoke of the need for culturally competent frontline mental health services, and she referenced approaches EMDR and CCT, contextual concept therapy, which notes that suicide itself is not a mental illness, but an attempt to create a life without intense emotional pain, which I thought was a very interesting observation and worth noting. Given the rates and prevalence of suicide among travellers, I think we may be able to reflect that the traveller community is experiencing that intensity of emotional pain individually and collectively, and that's why we're here today. So, a few questions, Minister. I mean, you would seem to be accepting that there is a crisis among travellers around mental health, and we're not disputing the figures or the prevalence or scale here. I would understand. Because I think that would be, an important thing. The All Ireland Traveller Health Study is out of date now, really. It's 2010. We do rely on it. We had some very strong figures from estimates from the Irish Traveller Movement around an estimated 30 deaths to the end of August. I'm just wondering, what kind of data do you have on which to base your department's response to a mental health crisis that you would seem to accept? So just that, there's one question on data and I have a couple of others then.
Okay. Yeah, and can I be clear? I mean, the acceptance of it being a crisis is undisputed. I'm not here to dispute that at all or to be defensive in any way, shape or form towards this issue. There's a reason for this committee having been established in response to, and that is how politics is supposed to work, in response to something that is terribly serious and dreadfully serious. So I just want to be absolutely clear with you on that, that I don't intend in any way, shape or form to diminish the seriousness of this or the challenge of this, and I want to be as proactive as I can with this committee and anybody else who will try and reach out to, I suppose, achieve a solution. The data you asked me specifically on the data that we rely on, I agree with you. 2010 is a long time ago for the Traveller Health Study that we're relying on a lot of that. A lot of my own information is from my engagement with groups like Pavia Point that represent and meeting individual travellers who tell you in very real, stark terms the issues that affect him. I don't want to be mentioning names, but I think people know who I'm talking about. That's a lot of what would motivate me in this area and lead me to the terminology that I used a while ago. There are things we can do, things that we should be doing. Obviously, we can always do more. I would like to explore. I've spoken already to Pavia Point about exploring the signposting phone line that is there. That if we could make that more culturally sensitive and culturally aware to the issues affecting travellers, and that maybe somehow we could feed into that phone line vis-à-vis training of the National Ambulance Service to make sure that people do have some assistance and guidance in recognising issues that are specific to travellers. Safe Talk is a training that has been rolled out under, and John Meehan can talk about that himself in a moment. There's been over 2,000 people trained in Safe Talk in the last 12 months. Every member of An Garda Síochána below the training college has been trained in that, but that is something perhaps we could look at, a dedicated programme to be rolled out among travellers. It's a training specifically around suicide and recognising suicide ideation and equipping people with the right and correct and appropriate language to use. So there are things we can do, there certainly are, and as I said, I look forward to this committee informing some of that for me and my staff in the department and indeed within the HSE.
Just a question, how much of the extra 39 billion might travellers expect to see devoted to services, both mainstream and specialised? Because I think I hear what you're saying about mainstream, but I think there is a case of having both mainstream and both specialised, and I think we don't need to think in binary terms about services, particularly when there is issues that have been raised time and time again about access to culturally appropriate services. So first of all, specialised, are you open to both specialised and mainstream? And secondly, the 39 billion, how much of that is likely to come the way of traveller mental health, given that you are accepting there's a crisis?
Well, first of all, just on the €39 million, that's going to be the National Service Plan. We'll decide the allocation of that, and that's something that I'll have to engage with my officials and the HSE. And that will be
39 million, not 39 billion. Yeah.
We wish 39 million. Yeah, so that's something we're going to have to address, collectively. And I can't prejudge that here and now and give a commitment to any specific. But I mean, that's what I'll keep repeating: is that I'm open to any suggestions and any. I suppose, any ideas that will come from this committee in time for that service plan, which will be done the next number of weeks, the discussions around that. So this is very timely. this meeting here today to focus our minds and our attention and our resources hopefully on that as well. And just to be clear, and I'm repeating myself what I've said earlier about the specialist services, you know, we could try and recreate canvas teams, especially for travellers and you know, very highly specialist services like that, but I don't think that would be the way forward at high specialist level. Obviously, I want really focus on access. That is what I've done from day one since I've become Minister with responsibility for mental health. We have looked at the whole online space, which is about providing mental health assistance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to people where and when they need it. And that is the future, where people can, you know, access help through their phones, through their iPads, or in local community primary care settings, where they can walk into their GP and they can have the provision of these 24/7. We are rolling out pilots of telepsychiatry and telepsychology, which again is you know, improving the access to these services and making sure that they are available when and where needed. All of that will benefit travellers as well as anybody else. That's just about, again, focusing on access and making it more accessible to people when they're needed.
Okay, thank you, Minister. Deputy Councillor, I want just to let you know that this committee will be producing our interim report quite shortly. So that it would seem to be timely, as you said, to feed that into the discussions on the allocations of that 39 million, because clearly there is a crisis, and it would be clear to us from what we've heard from all of the submissions that we received, and we've had so many submissions, and we've only scratched the surface in terms of the numbers of people we've been able to hear from directly. But that we would, I suppose, welcome your commitment that our interim findings would feed directly into that process for 2020, because people are dying and we can't wait, and there is an urgency to action in this area. And I suppose also, again, the travel organisations would say the establishment of a national traveller mental health steering group would be important. The development of a national traveller mental health strategy within strategies. Again, they're not either ors, they're both ands, and the allocation of the resources which we've been just talking to. So can you give a commitment around the recommendations of our report feeding directly into what will happen in 2020, not just something sort of pushed out into the future, given the immediacy of the crisis that's upon us?
Okay. Yeah, I can, Chair. I mean, the National Service Plan is what I'm referring to, which will be addressing how we spend €1 billion and 26 million euro, 1 billion plus 26 million euro. So it's not just the 39 million additional funding this year. There has been additional funding that is in the region of about 300 million over the last 5 or 6 years. It has increased by about 300 million. So there's very significant funding there to be allocated across the board. And it's about doing how we do what we do and doing it better. And I've always try to promote that if we always do what we always did, we're going to always get what we always got. It's about finding new ways of doing, you know, allocating these monies and looking at how we do what we do. So certainly in the National Service Plan, I can give you an absolute commitment, Chair, that I would be more than happy to consider the recommendations of this committee from your interim report vis-à-vis the allocation of those €1 billion plus euro towards the support of mental health.
But that would be very welcome, Minister. And I suppose finally, question for me is, there was a comment made by Mr Thomas McCann, who's in the gallery today, and I suppose Ms Minnie Connors as well would have kind of echoed it, about the indifference of the state to the plight of people in this level of crisis. Have you any reflections or comments on that? Because that indifference, which is a very mild way of putting it, would seem to be a theme that runs across so many of the submissions that we've received.
Can you just clarify indifference from the state to
the crisis in mental health?
Okay, among the traveller community. Yes. Okay. Look, I can only speak really for myself. It isn't for me to cast an eye over history of the state's treatment of people. This is an issue that is, as I've already acknowledged, a crisis, and I'm happy to acknowledge that again. That doesn't give me or anybody in this room any comfort whatsoever. I think the state has responded to suicide overall with the establishment of the National Office of Suicide Prevention. John will talk again, he's the head of that office, and we'll talk in more detail. The funding to that has grown exponentially over the last number of years, but again, I'm not saying any of this defensively. These are matters of absolute fact. But this is an issue that, as I said from the outset, I don't have a monopoly of wisdom on how to deal with it, and there is a whole of society approach, and that's why it has been tasked with the whole of government, being led by the Department of Justice and Equality, are the lead agent in driving issues affecting travellers. And as I say, mental health is more of a symptom of the malaise of the treatment of travellers than it of itself being an issue. There is developments all the time, as I said, the online space, and that the crisis text line is being developed as we speak. We'll hopefully have that again in a number of weeks, a crisis text line, which is something that has had phenomenal success worldwide, across the world, in people accessing, again, support and help at a time of dire need and in preventing suicide. So there are a number of initiatives that we are developing and continue to develop. And again, I would see a role there that is something that we could be more culturally sensitive and aware in the development of that crisis text line, and have a look at how we could tailor the development of that text line before the end of this year more towards traveller needs as well.
Thank you very much, Minister, and I welcome very much that you are acknowledging the crisis and you're open to looking at the resources and how they're allocated to respond to that crisis, and that's very, very welcome and noted by this committee, and we will act swiftly in order to be able to input into the 2020 service plan process.